Well, I think Rebecca holds up remarkably well. It may even look more interesting today than it did in 1940. Why do you think that is?
I think it never goes out of style. In fact, I always go back to Manderley when I'm thinking about these themes of sort of female insecurity for a reason. Like why she's so concerned about the motives of her husband, the kind of history of this house. It resonates with concerns that anyone would have about, like, you know, what's my role?
Well, it's the second wife syndrome, too, and which is more frequent now probably than it was even then. You always wonder about the first wife. Was he more in love with her? Is she hovering nearby? Is she watching us? It's also the ghost in every relationship. I mean, every couple, really, there's a mother or a father or an ex-spouse hovering nearby. It's also the sort of foundational text of chick lit, which is things
It is.
Jane Eyre and the Mad Woman in the Attic.
That's right.
And even before that, Pride and Prejudice, the fantasy of the prince in the country estate.
So it has that romance, but it also has the gothic. So the woman in the haunted house. So it's Bluebeard too.
Yeah,
it's like
it
where
combines all of those and a little bit thriller too. I mean, it's even The Sound of Music, the embittered man, widower, whose wife is gone, whose wife remains mysterious, and he needs to be softened and humanized, and he falls in love with this woman who has nothing obvious to recommend her.
That's right.
So the fantasy that the plain woman, somebody will see in her what nobody else sees in her.
which is classic romance.
Classic romance,
But it's
yeah.
also, you mentioned the father or the mother that's hanging over it, and there's the Freudian aspect of it. She's such a little girl, and he's such a faraway, distant, unreadable, and he belongs to a different era. She's interested in Rebecca because Rebecca was modern, and maybe this, you know, young woman will be modern too and not have to follow that path.
Maybe she can emerge from this whole sort of Victorian penumbra and become a modern woman, exactly.
What is the identity that this unnamed heroine, she's unnamed in the book, she's unnamed in the film, and that's why we're so close to her. But she never gets a name, and Rebecca is everywhere. Her signature is everywhere.
Well, she even disavows her name in that wonderful moment where somebody calls on the phone and asks for Mrs. De Winter, and she said, "Oh, Mrs. De Winter's been dead for a year."
That's right.
Oh, yeah, I'm Mrs. De Winter. That's right, I forgot.
And then when she comes into her own, she says, "I am Mrs. De
Yes.
Winter now." She still doesn't have a name. She's like, I'm still playing
and she's
this
still not
role.
quite rock solid because right after that is sort of the catastrophe.
That's right.
Of the ball.
I think part of the mystery of Rebecca and why she's never shown in the movie is this kind of star, imagination of what would Rebecca look like? Who would she be cast as?
That's right.
And for me, it's Vivien Leigh. It's,
Yeah.
she's already starred in Gone with the Wind, which Selznick's still finishing up as he works with Hitchcock on Rebecca. So I see Vivien Leigh kind of tormenting poor Joan Fontaine with her, with her beauty and her connection to Olivier and all of that.
Yeah.
But it's so much more powerful that we don't see Rebecca. In fact, we sort of see from her point of view. The very first shot of Laurence Olivier, after we cut from the beautiful, dreamy opening, is from below, from the sea. And you're like, whose point of view is this? And it's kind of where Rebecca has gone to haunt them.
I know, it's this magnet. Well, I thought one of the brilliant things in the Tanya Modleski essay is she compares it to the shark in Jaws, the unseen shark, which is so brilliant because he's all the more powerful and all the more menacing for not actually being there. In fact, when Olivier proposes to her, you hear this little thread of ghost music.
I'm asking you to marry me, you little fool.
You hear the touch of Rebecca's theme.
Of Rebecca's theme, and so that's all the way through.
There's two scenes, I think, that are so much about Rebecca's ghost because the camera or the blocking follows, where she has passed. And that's the scene in the West Wing with Mrs. Danvers showing Joan Fontaine Rebecca's things, and the scene in the boathouse that's narrated by Maxim, and he talks about what happened the night that Rebecca died. And the camera is tracking something unseen in both of those.
I know, it's great. And if you had actually showed the person, it would destroy the thing altogether.
My reading of the West Wing scene is that there's Rebecca's ghost is there. You hear her music, you see, the billowing curtains with sunlight strained through them, and everything is just ghostly and beautiful and sensual. There's even a place in the frame right between Mrs. Danvers and Joan Fontaine where there's a shadow cast, and you say, oh, that's Rebecca right there. And so she's the other woman in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but she's struggling with it. But there's a portrait of Maxim on the vanity, so that there's a struggle between the two for her. I think the sexuality, which is quite obvious and doesn't need to be spelled out, it's so brilliant, the lesbian theme of Mrs. Danvers, when she takes the fur coat and rubs it against her own cheek and then rubs it against the narrator. It's a kind of surfeit of femininity, too. You want the Olivier character to break through that. I mean, there's something overwhelming. This is where the Electra thing comes in, I guess, the woman has to know the mother, but she then has to
break away.
Has to break away.
I think that happens a little later in the scene for me, because I feel like she's very close to succumbing, the second Mrs. de Winter, to this spell that's being cast by Danny, who's really quite witch-like.
Oh, hypnotic.
And also Rebecca's ghost. So I think he's
They're
a little
winning.
They're winning. They're winning. They're winning in the music. They're winning in everything. And if it weren't for that sort of anxiety that crops up, and she scurries away from the West Wing, but only to go back there again.
Yeah. Well, she is drawn because, I mean, this is the thing of the woman's film, the artificiality of it sometimes is you're just so completely isolated. I mean, she's so totally orphaned. I mean, there's nobody, if it were, if it any kind of sociological reality, there would be somebody there to say, just come on, get a grip, but there's nobody. And, Hitchcock felt it was too much a Selznick film, and he kind of disavowed it, and I think critics took their cue from that, and I think underrated the film because they felt it wasn't really Hitchcock. But I think he's just beginning to come into his own in his American period here. But Selznick was just on the money because Hitchcock said it didn't have any humor. It was novelette-ish. In other words, demeaning it as too feminine, a feminine kind of thing. But Selznick was never condescending towards women. This is the great thing about him. I think he was really a little bit of a cross-dresser within. I mean, he loved thinking about these women more than seducing them. The seduction, according to Evelyn Keyes, was kind of obligatory, but he really loved thinking about it. And he talks in his memo about how every woman will identify with this awkward gauche girl who's in over her head.
And he provides all these details of how you'd identify with her, like when she drops this, and what woman wouldn't? And he's sort of saying, we too.
We all do, and he does in the guise of a woman. And it's also, Hitchcock felt it didn't have humor, but it is funny. Her forlornness becomes comical. I mean, she just makes so many gauche mistakes. It's a great performance. I mean, I really appreciated it more looking at it again this time because they had to work to get it out of her. And she was very inexperienced, which is good in one way.
In the role, right?
In the role. But her body language is like that of a fawn or something. She's flinched, every time they say something about how wonderful Rebecca was, she flinches away from it, or she shrinks. I mean, you really feel her shrinking.
Looking for me? Oh, I didn't make you jump, did I?
No, of course not. I didn't quite know who it was.
Or the scene where George Sanders appears, she actually sort of inflates like a bird, this sort of aggressive defensive position. So, I mean, it's just an amazing performance.
It really is, and the Selznick-Hitchcock combination is great in terms of another reason why the film is so compelling, which is Manderley. It's the mise-en-scène of this film. You want to go back there, and it's because it's this site of sensuality, but also terror, and it captures that so well. So where she's framed, when she's at the breakfast table, at this, crate,
she's overwhelmed, and
she's
she's so dwindling, yes.
Or the doorknobs, and I think this is Selznick and Hitchcock, because making her part of this opulent space, well, that's Gone with the Wind. That's Selznick. This house is her, or she wants to be part of the house. And then Hitchcock with those subjective tracking shots as she mounts the stairs or approaches the door to the West Wing, and the doorknob is, a little bit too high. So she's approaching like a child, like Alice, so there's
expressionistic.
Yeah, it really is, and he uses that again and again. So, downplay Rebecca as you will if you're a real, auteurist and want to talk about the romance of Vertigo. Rebecca is the one that won the Oscar, Rebecca is where that identification on Hitchcock's part with these women comes from. You have it in Suspicion, you have it in Notorious.
absolutely.
It's really similar.
Well, again, I think Hitchcock, like so many, he wants to disavow the feminine side in himself. I mean, it's obviously incredibly strong. He couldn't have made the great films that he did without that. I mean, there's this tremendous ambivalence. Truffaut talks to him about how it would have been different if they'd made it in England. And I think at this point, Hitchcock still wasn't really appreciating the film that much, but he said, yes, it would have been more realistic and probably not as effective, because they would have found a real country estate. It wouldn't have been this gigantic, Blenheim Palace.
Fantasy, right?
Fantasy,
Which is really, and that I think also goes to that, moment where we're trying, in the U.S., trying to kind of get support for Britain in the war, and there's this fantasy of country manners and Laurence Olivier, and Joan Fontaine with her sort of slightly fake or very elocution-y kind of
She's sort of
American way of talking
she's
British.
Well, that's another thing. She's sort of unplaceable.
Why did they have to find it? Why couldn't they have left it there in peace at the bottom of the sea?
I think one of the great scenes is when finally in the boathouse, just before he describes what happened,
You thought I loved Rebecca? You thought that?
I always thought when I was in your arms that you wanted to be with her.
I hated her.
The look on her face is both deliriously happy and horrified. I mean, it's really both of those emotions, because he loves her, but he murdered his wife.
Right, and what the heck's going to happen to me? But it also is true that when he declares himself and they're quote unquote together, it's all gone, all the magic is gone, which is why the movie starts with I dreamed I went to Manderley again last night, and stays in the past. It never comes back to this present, which, we kind of can't conceive
Well,
of.
it's what it's saying is that romance, love, passion has to have the mystery, the danger. Once it becomes domestic, it's gone. And the book actually starts with them on their, living in the south of France, and they eat the same food every day. I mean,
And they read the cricket scores, and it's just like, oh, whoa, no wonder you're like... And in fact, when she says, I dreamed I went back, it's like going to the movies.
It's true, and it's really about Gothic romance. It is a Gothic romance, which is about Gothic romance, as so many of Hitchcock films are.
Again, that's why feminist critics have been really interested in this film, because the source material has a female author, the adaptation is this director who's kind of known for his quote-unquote misogyny, but we wouldn't keep going back to his movies if there wasn't, another story there.
Misogyny is just too crude a word, especially for Hitchcock, but even for anybody. I think that's another thing that's happened probably in thinking about these films in the years since feminism first emerged, is that there's so many forms of liking and lusting and loving and disliking and fearing. I mean, there's just so many different emotions. And there's nothing monolithic in Hitchcock at all. And I think maybe the one way in which this differs is that Olivier is more of a sort of standard hero and less vulnerable maybe than than Jimmy Stewart and some of the other Hitchcock heroes, Cary Grant, in the later films.
That's right. We don't go inside him at
we
all.
don't get his point of view. This is what's different from the later films. You really don't get his point of view at all. He is just the brooding hero.
We should have stayed away. We should never have come back to Manderley.
Talking about Manderley, especially at the beginning, where we go through a gate that we didn't think we could get through. There's these miniature shots of this house that's fallen into disrepair. It's the beginning of Citizen Kane. It prefigures that, and you have that same sense of like what's going on here. And in that movie, it's a mystery about this man, but here it's all about like what was the life that animated this place when it's still
absolutely a great parallel. Yeah.
And again, we'll hear Hitchcock aficionados sort of elevating the later films, and this one really establishes a lot of that sense of mise-en-scène and specific kind of psychological compulsion, which is so central to
the other theme, of course, is the anxiety about age, a woman's anxiety about aging, as imposed on her by the man who wants her to stay young forever.
That's right.
She says, I wish I were in black satin with pearls and I was 36 years old. And he says, don't you ever wear black satin and pearls and become 36 years old.
Right.
In other words, freeze.
Right.
What on earth have you done to yourself?
Oh, nothing. I just ordered a new dress from London. I hope you don't mind.
And in it frees, or there is this sort of threat, you know,
Yeah.
that like that a kind of adult female sensuality is threatening to him. And I think, you know, that's what I think Robin Wood reads the film as, very much about this, you know, trying to deny this sexuality to both the unnamed heroine and to Rebecca, who, you know, really pulls the strings in the book, and even to a certain extent in the film, which was altered for the censors.
She pulled the strings, and he says she's still pulling the strings. He says she's won in a sense. She did win.
Yeah.
She did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's her name
Yeah.
on the film. It's her name, you know, written on the menu next to this. You know, this is where the first Mrs. de Winter picked her sauces for dinner. Like all of these really feminine details that are just, you know, crowding in.
There's no corner that hasn't been kind of colonized by Rebecca. And it's so funny, I think, when they tell her to go into the morning room or whatever to do our correspondence. Who's she going to write to?
Exactly. Exactly. And then,
Yeah.
and she has no identity, you know, answering the phone.
But this is
and-
what,
yeah.
in a sense, what a man wants, somebody who's completely pliable, who doesn't know anything, who he can control completely, as opposed to Rebecca, who threatens his bloodlines.
Yeah.
I mean,
And and that's also sort of the class allegory too, that, you know, Rebecca would threaten his bloodlines because she's, you know, perverse, she's got all these other things going. I mean, the ostensible explanation is
if
that
she
she's
were pregnant, it would
with
be
somebody else.
somebody else,
But
yeah.
we don't know, you know,
Yeah.
as Danny says, or Mrs. Danvers, you know, she sat on her bed and rocked with laughter at the lot of you.
Yeah.
You know, she like didn't care for any of these men. But the young...
every man's worst nightmare.
That's
I
right,
mean,
yeah.
she's a philanderer, maybe or maybe not,
Yep.
but worst of
She's
all,
a
she's
lesbian,
laughing
yeah,
at them.
yeah,
Lesbian and
yeah.
laughing at them. I think that's more terrifying to a male even than the promiscuity, is that it's just something that goes back to childhood of girls ganging together, ganging up and laughing at men.
Which I think is part of, I guess, if you think about this kind of Oedipal narrative for the young woman, she's having to be trained to kind of disavow the power that she has as a child who's, you know, not totally gendered and is not kind of succumbed to her role. So she is, even the young Mrs. de Winter, second one, is threatening in a way. She, you know, might not
No,
choose
yes,
to-
exactly, because
Yeah.
she can't be controlled. I mean, that's
Right.
why he keeps saying, you got to promise me this, promise me
Right.
that. She says, I love you. And he says, one day I'm going to remind you that you said that. So he already fears that she will stop loving him. So, I mean, you feel the male vulnerability, too.
I'll never come to Monte Carlo out of season again. Not a single...
And you could say also aristocracy, because she's,
Yeah.
you know, from this new class, she's a working woman after all.
No, she's my employer. I'm what is known as a paid companion.
I didn't know companionship could be bought.
You know, and it's the 40s. What if she just kind of doesn't need, you know, what if she opens, you know, a school for girls at Manderley or whatever? You know,
Yeah.
she doesn't come across as somebody who has those ambitions, but
she doesn't obey the norms.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
So-
you're right. I mean, this is a period when this is happening, when all sorts of rules are being cast aside.
And, you know, Joan Fontaine goes on to play good girls in the 40s, but showing a sort of steeliness underneath that good girlness that is not so different from the other. You argue this in From Reverence to Rape, the bad girls of the 40s. And Joan Fontaine later does have her evil roles. Born to be Bad and
Yeah.
Ivy. So
Yeah. Well, I happened to watch Possessed about the same time with Joan Crawford and Clark Gable, and it's the same theme of a man who's embittered by a wife's betrayal. She did something with the chauffeur and the town gossip. The whole idea of everybody gossiping
Being
and this
cuckolded,
is
yeah.
being cuckolded and everyone knowing it.
Yeah.
And especially if you're the big man in town,
Yeah.
which of course Olivier is. Everybody cares about what goes on at Mandalay. So at a certain point after they've shown the home movies, and when she's broken she's just
Trying
made a
to coup
fool of
Cupid.
herself, made the figurine
And hid it.
and she just feels like such a ninny. And she said, the only reason you married me is because I'm so gauche and awkward and nobody will gossip about
Yeah.
me. And where did she get this, though?
Yeah.
Because nobody, as far as we know, she hasn't really met anybody.
Right.
And where has she heard any gossip? But that is the main thing. He is concerned about that. And he has to be. That's the good name of
Right.
the master of Manderley.
And he wants, you know, her to kind of fade into that mistress role, but when she does it by being tricked really by Mrs. Danvers to make that costume for the costume ball, of Lady Caroline de Winter and comes down the steps in, like straight out of Gone with the Wind, just looking like, I'm putting this over in this gown. And he looks at her with complete horror. She's become the perfect picture of a beautiful, ancestrous,
Yes. And he rejects
aristocratic, but she's haunted by Rebecca again, laughing like, ha ha.
Yes, exactly.
We can all trick you. We can all pretend. That's what women have, over you, is we can tell you that you're the father, or tell you someone else is the father. You're not going to know.
So the man is the instability of being a man with a woman like this. That's right. And because in the beginning, you assume that the whole the idea of a woman who's without an identity in a sense, and will take it from the man, or will be what the man wants to be. You see that all the time in romance. I'll be whatever you want me to be.
That's the first person in romance novels, or the blank. She has nothing. Yeah.
But he's not giving her any guidance. The only thing she's getting is these hints about Rebecca.
And that's what I think's great about Laurence Olivier. I mean, he really is. He is the real deal, I mean, he's the Rochester who's actually sexy too. He does seem disinterested. He apparently was somewhat disinterested in the role, and he is preoccupied with, what's going on back in England, and he just has that right, and
he's perfect, and he also is playful when he needs to be playful.
That's right.
I mean, he can come out of his gloomy, romantic, Byronic misery once in a while and just be playful. But he's sort of unpredictable. Another thing that is sort of unsettling for her, because she never knows what to expect from him.
That's right.
Yeah.
The kiss or kill, which then Cary Grant in Suspicion is in that role, and it's even more sinister, right? Where in the very next film, which she does win the Oscar for, she's got this same, I thought you were going to kill me, and he's kisses her, but maybe that's, which is the worst thing.
Well, this is the great thing with Hitchcock, because the kiss can turn into the kill at any moment. The deep ambivalence.
And the ambivalence again is that kind of Freudian ambivalence, is
and the losing of
what does it mean? The
lose
losing of the
yourself
self,
and not wanting to lose the self, and being inevitably dependent on the man to sort of frame her place in the world, and struggling with that.
Yeah, and you can't find, and the film ends before you can kind of move to another place.
Yeah, it accepts marriage as a sort of default position.
Which at that point for a woman was, kind of prescribed for a middle class, or, or aspirationally.
Yeah, you folded yourself into man and matrimony. That was where you belonged.
Yeah. Or you go to the movies.
Yeah.
And you get to see these, this kind of, I mean, that's one of the things Tanya Modleski has, as you mentioned, this wonderful essay on Rebecca, but she also wrote a book on, on women's genres, and talks about the Gothic as, the Gothic is the after the Harlequin romance, where in the Harlequin you're like, does he love me? What's gonna happen? And then it turns out that his disinterest was really, oh, he loved you all along, whatever. And then in the Gothic, it's you're married, and then the house is your prison. And so it's very specific to isolation in marriage. So that ambivalence is profound too, and maybe resonating with these women whose men are, off to war, and they're kind of saying, well, maybe we don't need this totally domestic choice. Maybe there's some social realm where.
That's very true. The house is a prison. Questioning the whole domestic model.
Yeah. And of course it's romanticized too, because if you had to be trapped in a house, man,
then
it wouldn't be bad.
A great one, exactly. Well, it's having your cake and eat it too, somehow.
Yeah. So the end of the movie also, I think, was poached by Orson Welles in Citizen Kane. Not to give away the end of Citizen Kane, but we have an object that begins with the letter R burning, and we have smoke coming out of the chimney, and it's this lost object, this unrepresentable object that's associated with the mother, or at least with a female force that is, a fetish. It's the last image, and we remember it from Citizen Kane, and we forget that Rebecca ends with that passion, and not, well, maybe they do kiss, but their kiss at the end is very, anemic.
It is very obligatory. Yeah, that's absolutely true, and it's something that sort of purports to resolve the mystery, and yet which doesn't, which just makes it more mysterious.
That's right, and I think the 40s are full of these kind of movies that we might think of as male films, like film noir or like Citizen Kane, that are really touched by this Gothic sensibility.
Absolutely.